Hello friends, my name is Ty and I'm going to read to you. This is my erstwhile companion, Floki. He has been snotting around my office for the last half hour and decided that he wanted to be on YouTube. Are you ready? Probably not. I know it's been a significant piece of time since I recorded a new story. I do have one here that I'm pretty excited about. It's a little bit different than some of the other stuff I've written. I wrote it for a writing contest originally, and I'm really hoping you guys like it. It is called The Lady. Where are you going? Darius looked up into his older brother's face, only long enough to see his grin, the one that had a mean-spirited jest just behind it, and then went back to filling his pack. He squawked when Atticus reached past him with his quick warrior's hand and grabbed something from the pack. Atticus examined the item, a wooden flower, a rose in bloom, the stem of dark oak, the petals of fir and pine. Slow as melting wax, his grin faded away, and Atticus looked from the flower to his little brother. Darius, no, he said, real concern, rarely heard in his voice. You've worked on this for days. It could almost be your masterpiece. You can't leave it for that monster. Slowly, carefully, like he did all things, Darius reached up and took the flower from his brother's slack hand. She is not a monster, Atticus. She is a lady. He put the flower back into his satchel, arranged the clump of rags around it to keep it safe. It is not her fault she is as she is. The gods cursed her. And with good cause, I heard, Atticus muttered. He began to turn away, then turn back, his face tight with concern. Darius, please, he was almost begging now. Don't do this. You know how Mother worries every time you climb that bloody hill. It's bad enough we have to live in its shadow, but to actually go up there is folly. He paused. It's not safe. The emotions Darius most often saw from his brother were either indifference or spite. And this display of actual care moved Darius so profoundly he almost agreed to stay. But after a long moment he shook his head. No, Atticus, it will be fine. She won't hurt me. More times than he could readily count he had climbed the hill, and no harm had ever befallen him. Of course, that was considering he had hardly seen anything besides the odd hare and the kestrels that hunted them. But that detail wasn't particularly important. At least, Darius didn't think so. Atticus opened his mouth as to say something more, then closed it and gave his head a resigned shake. Just be careful. He turned away, and over his shoulder he said, If something happens to me, Father will blister my hide until I have to stand for meals. She won't hurt me, Darius said, his confidence growing with each recitation of the same phrase. She just needs a friend. The path up the mountain was steep, but Darius had made it so many times his legs and chest no longer burned with the effort. His brother was wrong, he thought as he climbed. The lady was no monster. She was the victim of a jealous god. The lady's presence near the town was the kind of secret that almost everyone knew, but all refused to admit to. His parents, it seemed, had worked very hard to keep the knowledge from him, and with good cause. Atticus, the eldest, was handsome, strong, and destined for the martial path, but he had all the curiosity of a kicked rock. Darius, however, considered everything carefully, was always hungry to know more, was forever asking questions till his parents, his brother, and the town elders were ready to drive him off with sticks. He had been working at his apprenticeship, carefully sawing planks for a table behind his master's shop when he first heard two of the town's garrison guards mention the lady. Only they had called her by her cursed name, spitting it on the ground when they said it. They named her a monster and made the sign of the evil eye. Darius watched them pass. He had been filled with questions until they nearly spilled out his ears. His master, Elias, had always spoken to him kindly, but when Darius asked about the lady, he had turned rough and closer to mean. He had cuffed Darius's ear with a calloused hand and ordered him to shut his mouth. You keep her name from between your teeth, Darius, the old man had said, cuffing his ear a second time. To call her invites her attention, and her attention means death. One bruised ear was enough, and Darius never brought it up to Elias again, but the curiosity near burned a hole in his chest. He took one of the few coins he had and bought a jug of sour wine, offering to share it with the garrison guards he'd seen before. They peered around carefully for their captain before accepting, but were willing enough to talk once they had cups in their hands. She was once beautiful, said one guard with a bent nose. So beautiful, she rivaled both Hera and Aphrodite. And proud, the other said, who had a long scar splitting his lip and chin. It was her pride that called the wrath of the gods on her. The first let out a long belch. Now it is death for any man to look on her. But what does she look like? Darius asked, grimacing as he took a small sip of the sour wine. The two men shrugged in unison. No one knows, said the first. No man has cast his eyes upon her and lived to tell of it. But she lives yonder, the scarred one said, gesturing up the hill with his cup. She takes refuge in an abandoned temple, where the priests of Apollo went mad and killed each other. The first turned to him. I thought it was her who killed them. All to take over the temple. No, idiot, the second said, poking his compatriot in the chest and spilling wine down the front of his leather breastplate. It was always cursed, and that was why she can live there. The others stood and their growls became shouts. Darius set the jug of wine on the ground and left them to it. That night he made the first of many long walks up the hill. He had heard there was an abandoned temple, but when he'd asked about it previously, his father had told him the well had fouled and the priests had moved to a new site the next valley over. A fouled well held no mysteries, and so Darius had never made the long walk up the hill. But a cursed temple, occupied by a cursed lady, was something worth seeing. The walk was a long one, the temple hard to find, and Darius almost gave up until he saw the hint of a white pillar through the trees. As he got closer, he saw the long, sprawling expanse of the old temple. It was almost completely intact, with only a few creeper vines on the pillars and sturdy weeds poking between the marble tiles to indicate the level of neglect. All around the entrance were stone statues, so finely crafted and lifelike that Darius assumed they were the life work of a master sculptor. He saw soldiers ready for battle, some cowering, others with swords mid-swing. He saw penitent men in priest's robe, their arms held up and calling for Apollo's grace. Each of them faced the entrance to the temple, as though their enemy came from within. Darius made it as far as the entrance, to the main corridor that led into the shadowed interior of the temple. Nothing moved inside, no sign of life at all. The floor was coated with dust, except for a single long line, as though someone had dragged a long sack along the marble tiles. Though he was a curious boy, Darius was not without fear, and the old place carried a palpable chill. Perhaps it actually was cursed. He made it 3 steps into the entrance before the weight of the place immobilized him. The sparse light filtering through the trees around the temple only reached a few paces past the entrance, and Darius had not thought to bring a lantern or candle. He had not even a flint and steel to fashion a short torch. He had almost made up his mind to leave when he heard the sound from the depths of the temple. It was a raspy, sliding sound, like something heavy being pulled along the dusty floor. Then he heard a faint hiss, and his courage failed him. He fled through the trees as though Hades and all his devils were on his heels. As he broke through the tree line and onto the sunlit hill, he stopped and turned to look back. Instantly he felt the fool. There was nothing there. Nothing to run from. Nothing to fear. As he made the long walk back, he resolved to return soon. Anyone who lived in a place like that was probably lonely. The lady needed a friend. And she would find one in Darius. 3 days later he returned. This time he brought gifts. 2 of his mother's honey cakes, a ripe pomegranate, some dried figs. He thought about wine, but all he could afford was the sour piss he'd given to the soldiers, and he did not feel that was what you gave to someone when you wanted to be their friend. Once he reached the temple, he carefully cleaned a spot just outside the entrance and set down a smoothed wooden plank to place his gifts on. He stepped back a pace and cleared his throat. "Hello?" he called. His voice sounded small, frog-like, in the quiet of the temple grounds. He hummed a moment, then called again louder. "Hello? Lady? I've brought you some things to eat." The only response was silence. My name is Darius. I mean you no harm. He just what? Heard there was a cursed woman living in the woods outside his town and decided to befriend her? I thought you might like someone to talk to. More silence. He sat down in a statue of a groveling man who was curled up like a turtle. He waited a long time until the shadows between the trees began to lengthen. Eventually, disappointed, he made the long walk home. But his resolve did not weaken. Every few days, when he was sure he wouldn't be missed, he made the walk. Each time he returned, the food was untouched. Not even the beasts of the forest would come near it. Dutifully, he would clear away the old gifts and replace them with new. He always called out, told her his name. assured her he meant no harm. But all the response he ever got was the heavy silence that seemed to hang over the old temple like a shroud. After a month, he decided to try something different. He had been making carvings at the direction of Master Elias. They weren't very good, but they were getting better. And the first time he made something, a long-necked swan that received a grin and nod of approval from his master, he knew where the carving would find a home. He took his usual fare to the lady's door, but he also brought the swan. He sat on the plank beside the honeyed cakes and rubbed his hands on his thighs nervously. "Hello, lady," he said into the dark. "I've brought you something different. I'm a carpenter's apprentice, you see, and I've made something worth sharing. So I brought it for you." He waited in the same spot, on the groveling man's back, but there was nothing. For the first time he felt a little sad, a little daunted. He was sure his gift would get her attention. As he picked up his pack to leave, he wondered if he were just wasting his time. Perhaps the lady would never want to speak to him. Perhaps she wasn't there at all. Perhaps he had made all these trips up the hill to shout into an empty building that even the rodents didn't bother with. When he was almost out of sight of the temple, he turned to look back, intending to see it one last time and then return no more. His breath caught in his chest as he saw a figure in the shadow of the entrance, just barely visible through the trees. It was something big, huge, its head nearly touching the top of the temple entrance. He saw it for only a moment, just enough to consider its size, and then it was gone. His resolve not to turn disappeared like fog beneath the sun, and he hurried home to begin work on a new gift. 2 days later he returned. The swan, he was delighted to see, was gone. The food was untouched, but the lady had taken the swan. He was so happy he nearly bounced in his joy. He reached into his pack and withdrew his new gift. This time it was a small frog, made of pale pine, with green chips of glass, begged from the town glazier for eyes. The lady, again, did not appear. She did not answer him. But when he returned 4 days later, the frog was gone. He smiled at the memory as he made a steady way up the hill, the rose carving packed carefully in the bag slung across his chest. This, he was sure, would be enough for her to speak with him. At the entrance to the temple, he picked up the wooden plank and rubbed it clean with a rag from his pack. When he was satisfied, he carefully withdrew the wooden rose from its bundle of rags and set it on the plank, directly in front of the temple entrance. Heroes were always giving damsels roses in the story, his mothers told him. He was sure this would work. "Lady," he called on the temple, "I've brought you something." He looked down at the rose. "It is my best work. My brother thinks it could be my masterpiece. But I've brought it for you." He cleared his throat, feeling an odd swell of emotion. "It's a rose." His heart lurched sideways, crashing into his ribs, as he heard something heavy, sliding, coming towards the entrance. On impulse, he knelt on the cold marble, like a man taking an oath, and picked up the rose, holding it up and out before him. He saw a massive figure in the shadows, just the vaguest impression of a long, tall body and thick shoulders. She must have seen him looking at her because she stopped and withdrew. Darius felt like calling out to her, asking, begging her to stay. Instead, he clenched his jaw, closed his eyes, and lowered his head. After the space of 3 long breaths, he heard that heavy sliding coming towards him again. He felt the rose pulled delicately from his grip, and then a huge hand, twice as big as his father's, gently rested on his head. Above him, he heard a single, whispered, sibilant word. "Darius." Then the hand was gone, and there was a rush of movement, and the heavy dragging noise, and Darius was alone. He was alone, but his heart was full. He felt blessed, like he had been touched by a goddess. He felt as light and swift as Hermes as he made his way home, thinking about the next gift he would make for her, for his lady. His elation faded and died as he saw a hulking figure, not so big as the lady, but still twice the size of Darius, sitting on the black stone beside the path to his small house. His father. Black-bearded and massive, Darius's father was a commander of the army of Athens, and was often away from home. He was home now, it seemed, and he did not look pleased. "Where have you been, boy?" he asked in his rumbling voice. "I've been looking for you all afternoon." Darius began, trying to think of a convincing lie. You've been up that hill, looking for that bloody temple, haven't you? Instantly, Darius thought that Atticus had betrayed him and felt ill. His brother was quick to make Darius the butt of a joke, or toss him into the dust when his mood struck him, but he had always kept Darius's confidence. He didn't know how, but he would exact revenge from his brother for this. I know what you're thinking, his father said. Do not think poorly of your brother. He would not say where you'd gone, even after I disciplined him. Darius looked at his father's big hands and saw the knuckles were red. It wasn't until Elias told me that you'd left hours ago and had been asking people about that cursed temple that I knew. Darius said nothing. If his brother, who was walking in his father's footsteps and was his clear favorite, had been disciplined over this, Darius knew what was coming. His father took a step towards him and Darius closed his eyes, waiting for the first blow to land, but no fist descended. Instead, his father grasped his shoulders and shook him slightly. Do you not know what resides there, boy? Darius opened his eyes and looked up at his father, his face a thundercloud. Do you not know what monstrous evil lives in that place? She is not a monster, Darius said, his voice surprisingly strong. He felt the spot in his head where the lady touched him was growing warm, and it gave him courage. She is only a lonesome soul. She needs a friend. A lonesome soul? His father roared, and shook him again. Darius, she is forsaken by the gods. She turns men to stone. To look upon her face is death. Turns men to stone. Darius thought of all the statues around the entrance to the temple. Now they all looked towards it. He shook his head. No, he said. She is not evil. She spoke to me. There is good in her. She just needs someone to see it. He was shouting now too, and small flecks of his spittle landed in his father's thick beard. His father's face was so red he thought it might burst. Spoke to you? Still, the blow didn't fall. Instead, his father gripped the back of his neck and pulled him into a crushing embrace. No, boy. You'll not go there again. I'll break both your legs if needs be, but you'll not climb that hill again. Do you understand me? Darius said nothing. Swear it to me, Darius, or I will take you from this place. I'll take you with me to Athens and leave you in the care of a carpenter there. No more gentle Elias, but a crew of men who will work you until you're broken. The thought of leaving hurt him so badly he almost cried. He needed to find a way to stay here. If he were gone, he'd never have another chance to speak to the lady. All right, he said finally. Swear to me, his father said, and squeezed him harder. I swear it. All right, his father said, and released him. Then did something that Darius could not remember him doing, since Darius still needed someone to clean his nethers. His father bent down and kissed his cheek. Good boy, he said. Darius awoke in the dead of night. There were screams outside. He looked over at his brother's bed, but it was empty. He sat up, threw his blankets off, and went into the main body of their small house. His father was half-dressed, a cut above his eye, a sword in his hand. Too many of them, his father said to his mother. Persians. You have to take the boys and run. Atticus had their father's armor in hand and was on his toes, trying to throw it over their father's towering head. What about the garrison? Darius' mother asked, wringing her hands. Can't they stop them? His father shook his head. The garrison is 30 men. There are 10 times as many clambering over the walls. You must run. Through the open front door, Darius could hear the shouts of men in combat and see the glow of buildings aflame. They needed help, and he thought he knew where it could be found. He ducked into his room and hastily pulled on his shoes and shirt. Then he bolted past his father into the night. Darius! He heard his father shout behind him. The many trips up and down the hill has made his legs strong, and fear gave his heels wings. He sprinted up the hill, his breath ragged and burning in his throat. He stumbled and fell several times, his hands cut and raw, but he kept surging upwards towards the temple. Lady! He screamed, as soon as he could make out the shape of the temple in the moonlight. Lady! My town is attacked! We need help! Please! He tripped over something hard, his right knee exploding in pain as he tumbled. He cracked his head on the marble of the entry. He tried unsteadily to get to his feet. I know you can help us. Please, you have to help. He waited, his knee throbbing, feeling something hot and wet leaking down his scalp. The pain disappeared when he heard a heavy body move in the entryway, accompanied by a soft hissing sound. Please, he said, his eyes on the ground in front of him. My family will be killed. We need help. He felt that touch again, on the top of his bowed head, and heard a low growl. Then the hand disappeared, and the night was filled with the sound of a lady crashing through the trees. He followed as quickly as he could, and a warmth in his chest once again gave his feet wings. Clear of the trees, on the moonlit hill, he saw the lady, her long body low to the ground, streaking down the hill towards his home. He hurried after, already imagining his praise his father would give him for bringing such a powerful ally to bear. When he finally reached his town, the fires he saw had died down, and there were no more shouts or screams. He grinned, the pain in his leg and head forgotten as he went through the gate near his house and made his way to the center of town. He imagined his father speaking to the lady, thanking her for her help, as the town cheered. But Darius' steps slowed and realized not only the shouting had stopped, but he heard nothing at all, only the faint crackle of flames. Then, ahead of him, on a wide street, he saw a shape, a big shape, a man shape, with his sword raised. As he got closer, he saw the figure wore armor, his father's armor. "Father!" he called, but there was no response. He ran forward and threw his arms around his father's waist, but cried out and fell as he crashed into stone. Sprawled on the ground, Darius looked up into his father's face, his roar frozen in gray marble. He looked around, and everywhere he saw statues, both Greek and Persian, in postures of either fear or anger. "No," he said softly. This could not be. The lady was his friend. She would not do this. Behind him he heard that heavy, dragging sound, a hiss, and a single, sibilant word. "Darius." He turned and looked upon the most beautiful face he had ever seen, wreathed by writhing shapes. Then the pain hit him, and it felt like a massive hand with all the weight of a mountain gripped his chest. That beautiful face was sad as it laid a massive hand on the stone head of a once handsome boy. The end. Generally, my stories have a happy ending, but that, I'll let you draw your own conclusions. I really enjoyed reading that, and I hope you guys enjoyed listening to it. And once again, as always, thanks for being here.